The first question I have lined up is if maybe you could give a definition of what planning is and why it's important to historic preservation and for local communities.
So as the planner, do you want to jump in on that first, Katie?
Sure, I'll give you the official definition. So I would say that it's the process of incorporating meaningful community engagement into the process of preparing a community's long-range plans. And long-range plans it's certainly the comprehensive plan for the community, but also could be a small area plan that you have for a particular area. And of course, those long-range plans are the guiding documents then that you will use to set up your zoning and subdivision land use regulations. So again, big focus on community engagement.
Mm-hmm. So that's the same approach we take here in Point. Main Street as an organization tends to be a pie in the sky kind of planner. So we started at the very beginning with what does the community want to see out of Point Pleasant? Money's not an option. What's the end goal here? And then work backwards from there. So, you know, for us, planning started with the vision that the community has, and then what ordinances, regulations, grant applications do we need to get to that point?
So I'm going to give you my perspective from the sort of the Landmarks Commission view. I look at planning as sort of a state of being ready to pounce on opportunities as they come up. And not having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time one of those opportunities does present itself. And I think you see this in Shepherdstown, and you see this in the history of Wheeling, the heritage area as well, when opportunities like the theater there downtown come up, or problems like that come up, or vacant old buildings come up, that the opportunity presents itself to invite other firms, like in the case of Wheeling, the law firm, to come in and hit the ground running, and sort of the groundwork is already as laid as you possibly can make it. That's my view.
I think the word, oh, so sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, I was just say I think that's an excellent point.
Well, because I was going to say opportunity is a really good transition to our next question, and the work being done in Wheeling and elsewhere in the state of the intersection between economic development and adaptive reuse of historic buildings. And I was wondering how those are playing out within your fields and in your communities.
Yeah, so I think adaptive reuse is the best economic development. When you're considering developing a property, you have to consider all of the infrastructure that's underlying that property. And so, like right now in Mason County, we've got Nucor, right? $3 billion steel mill going in. But to do that, they're having to lay all new water. They're having to build a new sewer plant. They're having to build new substations, expand a highway. Adaptive reuse, you don't have to do any of that. If you're looking at a building downtown, the water's already there, the sewer's already there, the power transmission's already there. For the most part, the building is already there. I mean, it might be a rough building, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to at least have 4 walls and a floor. Might not have a roof sometimes, but that can be fixed. So when you're making the case to a developer, they have to consider all of that, and they don't always. Sometimes they're looking at the big picture of, you know, this is going to be an expensive building to fix, but they're not necessarily considering all the other costs that go into it. And so that's, you know, that's where as a city, you really have to push downtown development.
I agree. Because, you know, it sometimes in the planning world, you kind of sometimes have to allow planning to take a back seat when you know that a community's focus is economic development. And of course you want that because you want the healthy growth of the community and its economy to be able to support its residents. But I agree with what Chris says, and that you need to point out these other features because, you know, you know, the greenest building is one that's already built, as long as it's built well, right? And so absolutely wanting to point out those things that already exist, because it's not only the initial cost to connect to all that infrastructure, but the maintenance of it all. So, you know, I think that it's always better to go, when you can, go for adaptive reuse rather than contributing to sprawl too, because then you have to look at maintaining those new lines and that new set of infrastructure that you've had to run, and you hope that the project is going to thrive long enough to support that for your community. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that anytime you can take a potential brownfield site and, you know, clean that up and take away any threat that that could be posing to the community with the health and visibility, you know, visibility isn't a threat, but clean it up for the better is always a good opportunity too.
Yeah, I agree with what both panelists have already said. I see adaptive use as really being something that is wonderfully flexible. And I think that's so important for our older towns to have. We're not locked in. We recognize that functions of these buildings change over time, but the historical character can be preserved while allowing for new uses. So just as the other panelists have said, you know, we've already got that infrastructure in these older towns. Let's take advantage of that. You've got community formation already there. You've got in these older towns where these adaptive use projects mostly are happening, you've got a diversity of options that you have that can outlast economic changes, can outlast trends. It's very, very important, where you see, you know, some of the outlying areas that have developed to the detriment of some of the cores of the old towns. Those are already starting to go out of fashion and starting to close off. And so you're seeing more and more sprawl, whereas adaptive use allows for that focus in these downtown areas that I think is so important. It's really a critical, you know, planning tool, planning option.
Okay, well, this all sounds great, but how do you get started?
So in point, we had to get started by first getting everybody on board. Main Street, our program's been around since 1989. The first Main Street started just a little bit before that, and so it was a relatively new program still. And we were in the second round in West Virginia, so still very new in West Virginia when we started. And we had to get all of the city administration, the county commission on board with this idea that we're going to take this horribly blighted downtown and make it into something that we can use again. And for a lot of people, that's not easy. I mean, a lot of people can't see past the crumbling brick and the broken windows. They see demolition where we might see opportunity. And so having those honest conversations with your city council, with your mayor, with your county commission, can help get you across maybe the starting line. And we've gone through cycles of that. We've had mayors in the beginning who were really supportive of Main Street and basically let us do whatever we wanted. And we've had mayors more recently who maybe didn't. We had one in particular whose view was that we should demolish downtown and build a shopping mall. But, you know, we work through advocacy and public relations, and if you have the public supporting what you're doing, the administration will come around. Now we have a mayor again who lets us do whatever we want. So, so for us, it all starts with the people in town have to be behind what you're doing. Like we said earlier with planning, it starts with the community, and you can't just come in and say, hey, we're going to do this project. You have to do a project people want to see, or you're not going to have the backing to do it ever. You're just not.
My team here makes fun of me because I like to use the phrase Avengers Assemble, but I mean, assemble your team, and figure out who should be on your team. So a lot of what you're saying there, Chris, so a town manager, your county administrator, that structure, hopefully they are supportive of the goals that hopefully a planner. So hopefully a planner is someone you have on board if you're talking about how do we get started with updating a comprehensive plan, or maybe you don't have a comprehensive plan. So, it also works if you have a planning consultant. I know that the land use clinic here at WVU has been instrumental for a lot of communities throughout the state, and then identify those key stakeholders so they can provide guidance throughout it. And I think that also what you need to do is review existing plans that you have on the books. So if you do have a plan and it has not been updated, your team needs to take a look at that and see, okay, what benchmarks have we hit since we adopted this plan last? What have we hit? What have we missed? What has completely changed in our community? Have we had a population loss? Has our community changed to have more commuting into the city? That's something to think about. And then again, I'll say it again, community engagement is key, just like Chris said, because these are the folks that you want to keep in your community, and you want to figure out what's missing. Are there restaurant options that they're looking for? Are there features for the children that really keep them there, and that's a focus for them? And how can you integrate that into the plan and into the city? So yeah, that's my thought.
So for the case of Shepherdstown, I think that we've been really lucky in the sense that, at least from my perspective, the planning evolved really from a grassroots situation back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where from what I understand, even before that, back in the 80s, Shepherdstown, you didn't quite see tumbleweeds blowing across German Street, but it was close to it from what I understand. And I've seen pictures that make me think, it was not always been the yuppie town that it is today, for better or for worse. There's definitely been some gentrification, but you had a core group of people who were really committed to historic preservation and who saw that its importance and worked to make sure that historic preservation was enshrined in our master plan, was enshrined in our Title IX, which lays down the powers of the Historic Landmarks Commission. And so we started, at least my understanding of it, much more organically, which is, we're very lucky, I think, in that sense. And we continue to really put a premium on historic preservation. And as we update our master plan, that's reflected in that new master plan as well.
Well said.
All right. Well, and Katie, you have a background in this, and Chris, but what do you do if you don't have a certified planner?
I am a big believer in both. You have to know what you don't know, but you also have to know how far you can get away with winging it. There's certain elements that come naturally to historic preservation planning. Okay, like when you're looking at historic landmark ordinances, a lot of that's outlined in state code. A lot of that comes from the top down. And so you can sort of get into that and get that into your city ordinances without necessarily having a professional planner. But then when it comes time to enact those ordinances, you want to know that maybe you don't know everything, and maybe you don't know how to take that ordinance and turn it into action. And so that's when you get, there's grants out there. You can go after survey and planning grants to look at establishing your historic district. You can hire an engineer to look at this one problem. You can get with brownfields and, the WVU land use clinic. And so there's a lot of resources out there to help you once you take that first step. Once you have the city on board and you have people supporting it in the community, there's a lot of people out there who can come in if you don't have a planner. I mean, Point Pleasant doesn't have a city planner. I mean, I don't know very many towns in West Virginia that do. And so, you know, you really have to take advantage of a lot of those free, I say free because someone's paying for it, but not you always. And so you have to take advantage of all that.
I agree. I recognize that there are not many planners throughout West Virginia, and I think what you said is key, recognizing that you are not the subject matter expert in all of it. None of us are, and so I think that that's so important, is not trying to pretend to be that way. I think it's okay to call in consultants as you can afford to do so. You know, it may be that they just help do some incremental steps to get you to where you need to be. So I agree, figure out who can help you with some of these things. So the land use law clinic is one option. I get excited when I talk about if a community wants to apply for an EPA brownfield assessment grant, because now that's a way that you can get some planning dollars to help you think about the visioning and planning piece for a community that maybe you hadn't been aware of. And again, that's a capacity issue, I recognize, but sometimes you can benefit from. So if Jefferson County applied for one and Shepherdstown found that, you know, it'd be beneficial for them to apply for planning dollars, then they don't have to be administering the grant. There can be that partnership there. So that's a good way to do that. And like I say, I know that resources and capacity is a big concern, but I do agree with that. I think, you know, Chris makes an excellent point of bringing in those who can help guide the process for you. And also sometimes, you know, it can be volunteers. It could be someone who's retired and their previous experience was in that. And let's also not forget that planners have varied backgrounds, right? Mine happens to be in urban affairs and planning, but a lot of them may be historic preservation background and training. Some may be geography, political science, public administration. So if you have some folks with similar backgrounds like that, they may be able to help guide and provide input like that.
Yeah, I really don't have too much to add to what the previous panelist said. We've been fortunate in Shepherdstown to have drawn on the skills of planners for a while, but we did also employ volunteers when we were putting together our master plan. So there's certainly an important role for that to be played, and I think that's important. You kind of have the best of both worlds. You have the training of the planner, but you also have the essential community input.
And so, speaking of community input, what kinds of education around historic resources, historic preservation can you undertake or have you undertaken?
So a lot of it for me is just sort of picking up things as you go from the people you're working with. I mean, I have a background in historic preservation because I was one of Dr. A's kids at Shepherd. But post-college, I mean, a lot of it is who you're dealing with in the state. Like, you know, don't be afraid to work really closely with the SHPO, because Susan and Claire and Meredith and Cody and all the other folks on this call, they know what they're doing. And so there have been a lot of instances where myself and other people in our community have just called Susan and said, hey, we have this problem. How do we fix it? And, you know, Mike Giolis, who might be on here, there's a Mike G, but he's been our architect at Main Street for, you know, 35 years. And we use him for everything. And there's always something new from him every time he comes down. So a lot of it's just listening, being able to just pick up things over time as you deal with these problems. And then there's some, in West Virginia, there's sometimes where you can get out and attend courses. The Preservation Alliance of West Virginia puts on an annual conference. This year is in Wheeling in May. The SHPO does trainings like this one. And occasionally you see webinars from the National Trust or Main Street America. National Main Street does probably one big webinar a month. And it's a wide variety. It's economic development, it's historic preservation, it's organizational capacity building. And so you can always tap into those, and they're all free. And most of a lot of the bigger historic districts in West Virginia are part of Main Street districts, or hopefully will be in the near future. Like Morgantown, Wheeling, Charlestown, Martinsburg, Fairmont, Point, Parkersburg, Ripley, Central City, and Huntington, Elkins. So I mean, there's a lot of resources outside of our historic landmark commissions that we can tap into.
I'm going to be a little bit different with my answer with this and think about exposure of your community to historic resources. My background is not in historic preservation, but I appreciate it, and I think it's an integral part of it. But again, I was really lucky for my first job, I was assigned to be, staff person to the Historic Landmarks Commission, and just the opportunity to be around those folks and learn what they learn about, learn what they know about the local area and the buildings as you're reviewing that, the thought that goes behind thinking about if this sign is going to be in keeping with the character of the building. So I think that, if you're new to this, to sit in on some of those meetings, to learn more about that. The one for Jefferson County is even more extensive, right? With the thought that they put into that, and with the ordinances that they have in place. I think that that is fantastic, and it was really helpful for me. But I think that also to think about for the community. I know I'm from Hardy County, and so we have the Hardy County Heritage Weekend each year, and so that's a really special opportunity, and it's changed certainly over the years, but I think it's a great way to expose the young generation, the kiddos, to foods, from many years ago, and activities and the crafts and artisan demonstrations. I think that things like that are really good. And also in Hardy County, we tour historic homes. I know when I was in like 6th grade, I dressed in period clothing, and I don't know, showed them where a room was in a house, but those are good ways to expose kids to history that's unique to their area. And so I think that, things like that are really important. And so also, things like a walking tour, if you have that in the community, there are different ways. If you are the Chris in your community, and, you want to learn more about that, then a walking tour is helpful as you start to put that together for the sites in the buildings, but also then thinking about how that helps the community. You could do something like a passport for kiddos. Again, these are things I think about as I'm traveling with my kids. We're big fans of the Junior Ranger program through the national park. So, things like that are, what's going to get them young and get them to appreciate the history that you have there. So I agree. I think there's always an opportunity to learn. And so mine's not touching on your bit, Chris, but that's important too. So, of course.
Yeah, so many options here. In Shepherdstown, again, I feel like we're really lucky because we have what seems like a built-in enthusiastic audience for all kinds of public programs, especially revolving around historic preservation. So I don't know how many I have done, and I know a lot of my colleagues have done programs on the historic resources of Shepherdstown and Jefferson County. Many, many, many. We also have received an educational grant, and so we're working on that now for public programming, probably more of a sort of an online approach, at least in part for just educating our residents about the importance of historic preservation and about what kinds of contributions it can make economically as well as culturally and so on. We have the option to do a number of demonstrations, like window repair demonstrations, windows workshops. A number of years ago, I worked with our elementary school, and I had the 5th graders out taking pictures of various features in Shepherdstown, and the idea was, what makes Shepherdstown unique. And so we exposed these school kids to the idea, the importance of these, identifying or, character defining features of the town and its buildings. And not only that, but we generated like 5 or 6 posters that I still pull out every now and then that the kids have used for their photos. It's just showing the kids' view of what makes Shepherdstown unique. So there's a great educational value to those. One of the things that we have really started ramping up in the last couple of years with the Landmarks Commission is that we're encouraging potential applicants to come before the commission to do a workshop before they actually do a session itself, an application. And that has, I think, saved a lot of grief and hopefully brought a lot of goodwill on the part of people, because we're helping them with their projects and showing them what they need to change before they have spent money or other kinds of resources in a project that's just not going to fly with the Landmarks Commission. We also have the good fortune of being able to work with partners, including Shepherd University, but also the Historic Shepherdstown Commission in the Entler Hotel. So they are our official preservation partner. So we are able to do lots of joint programs. The thing about education is sort of the downside to all of this that I've realized, because I've been doing this for 18 years at Shepherd and been on the Landmarks Commission for about 6 years or so, I would probably guess right now, maybe a little bit more. The process never ends. So you can never rest on your laurels. You are never done educating. You always have to be almost starting from scratch, because you have a lot of turnover in the town, especially after COVID. A lot of new people came in, purchased properties in Shepherdstown, maybe are not as well up to date or up to speed on the importance of historic preservation. So it's a never-ending process. So you're never done, which is good and bad, I guess.
So true.
Chris or Katie, would you like to maybe discuss any of the challenges you faced in your educational efforts?
There's always pushback, always, because at the outset, especially from contractors, somebody who's going to be doing the work, they don't always understand why we're wanting historic windows as opposed to a cheap vinyl one from Lowe's. And so property owners and the townspeople, they have to be educated about what's important to the community and why, because ultimately it's their building, but also the contractors and the folks that are going to be coming in to do the work. And sometimes that can be difficult if they're not in your town. Point Pleasant's close enough to Huntington and Charleston that we get a lot of contractors from those areas. And so, somebody who isn't familiar with our historic district, you're basically going to have to start from scratch and educate them while you're doing the project. And sometimes that can be challenging. But like Dr. A said too, the new people coming in, it can also be one of the hardest parts. With new core and the plants coming in here, we're expecting within Mason County, Putnam County, Cabell County, probably 10,000 new residents over the next 10 years. And, not all of those people are going to appreciate West Virginia's history and culture. They're going to come in and, they'll learn to appreciate it, but some of them are going to come in with the stereotype that we're all redneck hillbillies, right? And so you have to sort of counter that and show them, here's the real history, here's what we do for fun, here's, why is the Battle of Point Pleasant so important to the town, right? And so, there's always something.
I agree. I know I have battle scars from trying to convey the importance of wanting to maintain new construction. So if a new building was going to be constructed in a historic downtown, how do you get that new construction to complement what is there? And look like it's been there for quite some time, and understand that you can ask for those things. And these big box businesses are not going to walk away, because this is not the first time they've had that request, and it is okay to ask for that. And when that is what a community wants to ask for, there needs to be a unified vision for that, and everybody pushing for the same goal. And there have to be compromises along the way, but again, it's okay, so that you get those windows like Chris is talking about. Or again, if you have a vacant lot, or you've got some buildings that have been demolished for a new construction, that's okay for that to look like that. And that's a big push, and something that is frustrating, is that wanting better design historically, again, knowing that that's new construction, but wanting it to complement that precious historic fabric of your downtown, is not going against the grain of wanting growth and economic development in your community. In fact, it holds it to a higher standard, and it's okay to ask for that. So I've got battle scars from that.
Yeah, so in addition to the contractors that Chris talked about, I would also like to add realtors to the list of something that, a group that we continually talk about in our Landmarks Commission meetings. We're always struggling to figure out how to reach this group, and it shouldn't be that hard. I'm not, if anyone has ideas, I would love to hear. But a lot of the times the realtors will not really mention the limits of what people can undertake with their houses that they purchase here in Shepherdstown. And so they'll purchase a property and have grandiose plans to turn it into whatever and do whatever to it, and then they show up at our Landmarks Commission meetings and say, well, no one mentioned this to me at all, and we've got to figure out how to fix that. And I think that it's not just, I think we may be more successful if we approach in a way that is not just saying what historic preservation is telling you can't do to your properties, but really emphasizing the advantages that historic preservation brings to your building and to your community and to your property values, frankly. And so I think if we emphasize the role of preservation in maintaining it and increasing the value of the properties, as well as the grants and other funds that are available as a result of being a certified local government, for example, I think that might help us sell preservation and do our outreach to realtors more successfully as well.
We got really lucky early on in that. So the founder of our Main Street program, who is still the chairwoman of my board of directors, is the biggest real estate agent in town and from a well-known business family. And this goes back to the whole circle of finding the people in your community and making sure they're on your team. Because Sandy, in the past 35 years, has made sure that she is the realtor selling any building in the historic district. Like anytime we've had one come up, the State Theater, the Low Hotel, it's through her brokerage because she understands historic preservation and she wants a buyer who will appreciate that and make sure it's done right. And making sure that they understand, because real estate agents, in my experience, they're generally looking at the dollars and cents. And they understand when we talk about things like historic tax credits. Property owners, maybe don't always, because they're not looking at necessarily the taxes on the property. They're worried about living there and being there. Whereas a real estate agent, if you can get 20% back on the renovation of your house, they are all for that. And so it's finding the people and then finding how you talk to those people, because everyone's going to care about a different thing. And so in your first conversation with that person, just sort of let them tell you what they care about and then tell them how that's good for historic preservation.
Yeah.
All right, so one last kind of set of questions for you. The first of which is, how have you incorporated preservation into pre-existing long-term plans or formulated long-term plans?
Yes, I mean, I think we've touched on this maybe a little bit already, but like the city of Point Pleasant, we have codified in our ordinances that we have design review standards for the entire historic district. We have rules and regulations as to what you can and can't do, how you should do it, and all those things. And those rules are then reflected in our city master plan. When we're looking at economic development, and actually we're in the process of revising this plan right now, but making sure that for us, the historic district is where we're looking at economic development for the next 10 years. Point Pleasant, like a lot of towns in West Virginia, we're hemmed in by 2 rivers on one side and by hills on the other side. So there's nowhere really for us to grow. There's nowhere to build a new subdivision. There's nowhere to build a new Walmart. And so making sure that we're focusing on the assets we already have, and making sure that those assets tie into the rest of the town. Can people bike from the neighborhoods uptown to downtown to enjoy the historic district? And those sorts of things. Just making sure that the historic district and the businesses there are, in everything we're doing, somehow tied in. Making sure it connects to our parks, making sure it connects to our businesses, making sure that the hospital is a player in downtown, that the schools are a player, and all those kind of things when you're drafting and revising those plans.
I agree. I'm sitting here thinking about what to add, but I think that that's excellent.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, our master plan really features historic preservation quite prominently. It's really lies at the basis of Shepherdstown identity. So again, we're very lucky that way, and that is reflected in our in the legislation, the planning and zoning ordinances that create the basis for the Landmarks Commission. In Title IX of our local code, and it's reflected in the update of our master plan. And so as we update the master plan, we kind of look back at our original master plan, taking account of what has been done already, what needs more work, and so it's an ongoing process, and it just is integral to Shepherdstown's identity, and it's reflected in its legislation.
I think anytime you have organizations that are doing the great work that you're doing, I think it's always good to have some promotion about that, if that's social media, because that's the way the world is right now, right? They like when you can highlight a story of one of the historic buildings in sight. Honestly, Dr. Alexander, I was curious to know what the kids found, what through the eyes of the kids, what they thought was pretty cool about Shepherdstown, you know, and something like that would be interesting to hear about. But just bringing these things to their attention so that the community knows and gets behind wanting to, again, maintain these buildings and again, promote that information. Hopefully the realtors or get that information too.
Yeah, you've hit at, I think, both a strong point and a weak point. I used to be on social media, and I just am not anymore. It was just too much. It's
a mental health thing. I understand.
Yeah. I wish that I were better at it. I've distanced myself from it, but it's a real shame. But we do have so much that we could be and should be pointing to and really promoting. And I wish that we could figure out a way of doing better on that front.
All right, well, that those are all the questions I have prepared. I'd like to open up the floor for anyone to share their thoughts or ask questions of our panelists.
Thank you all. I hate to jump right in over top of everybody, but hi, and just wanted to ask Katie if you don't mind talking a little bit more about the WVU Land Use Law Clinic, just so people get a sense of what that.
Sure, as
Well,
best I know, because I don't work with them, but I love working with them. I know I can see a few faces on here for communities I know they've provided assistance for, whether that's helping the community go through the comprehensive planning process, because again, it's a big undertaking, and for those who don't have a planner on staff, or the ability to pay for a consulting firm, they will come and do that. They will go through the community engagement piece to come up with the vision for that, and then work together to put the comprehensive plan together, and then take it before their council and get that approved. And then they've also helped then come in as well and do zoning and subdivision regulations. But again, it's a much more manageable way financially for communities to be able to do that, and they are such a great asset because it's land use lawyers, but also they have a planner or two on staff. So they're very familiar with the process, and they travel to the community and have several meetings. Mayor Bev, I feel like I know they've done some work in Cape and Bridge. Did they do one for Romney also, comprehensive plan? I'm calling her out. I don't know. But I hope that helps a little bit, but they are a fantastic resource. Did that help?
Yeah, thanks so much.
I would certainly echo the beneficial uses of the land use clinic. During my last term as mayor of the city of Richwood, we engaged with that group of wonderful folk, and we're still in contact many years later. And they assisted in huge measure for the original comprehensive plan.
It's great. I'm glad to hear that. Richwood has a lot of good things going on too.
Thank you. We think so too.
Ray Moeller in my office, he loves Richwood.
I was elected to the position as chair of Nicholas County Historic Landmark Commission following Ray's term.
Oh, that's excellent.
And I've known and loved and worked with Ray and Connie May for many years.
I'm so glad.
So I'm going to just jump in and add something that I should have brought up with the education component, and that is the aspect of needing to educate the university about historic preservation. Because the university, unfortunately, it can sometimes be one of the main offenders. And I think, is it Ripkema who's identified, I think it's hospitals, universities, and churches as the big three kind of historic preservation offenders, which is unfortunate. So I definitely have seen one of my roles as continuing to update new presidents as they come and go at Shepherd, and new facilities maintenance directors and so on about what we should be doing with our historic resources.
Couldn't agree more. As a planner, I drive around Morgantown and get
boy,
frustrated
yeah.
for all of it.
Yeah.
Fix up these buildings and have them complement one another. So, anyway. Love you, Morgantown.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we'll take a quick break and then come back at 11 for our next session on design guidelines. But thank you to our panelists.